Battlefield 6 is off to a strong start, and it's probably the most fun I've had playing an FPS game in the last few years. It's topping the sales charts on every platform it's on, and over the weekend it pushed beyond the peak concurrent player numbers that it achieved on its launch day. So it's safe to say people are paying attention to this game. Whether you're someone like me who puts in countless hours 5 days a week, or if you're just someone who likes to game with their friends on a Friday night, chilling out and having a good time, Battlefield 6 does seem to be capturing a pretty big audience at the moment. But it's not perfect. Like any game, there's going to be some great parts and some not so great parts, and Battlefield as a franchise is no stranger to this. Just in the last few days, players have been picking up on some of the not so brilliant parts of Battlefield 6, and I think it's important that we speak about them. We've got lead developers asking for feedback and opinions on social media, so that's exactly what we're going to give them. In this video, we're going to discuss some of the top issues with Battlefield 6 right now, including the debate around weapon bloom or spread, which appears to be bugged, the level grind being painfully slow, and the overall map pool at launch not really having the grand scale that we've come to expect from Battlefield games, amongst other things. So if you go on to enjoy this video, consider dropping a like, subscribe to the channel if you're not already. We're trying to hit 1 million subs over here. And if you've got your own feedback that you want to share with the developers, drop it down in the comments below and drop a thumbs up on comments that you agree with so they rise to the top. You never know how many Battlefield devs might be watching. Okay, let's start things off with the weapon bloom or spread issue in the game right now. This has been one of the biggest discussion points that I've seen on social media over the first few days after launch, and personally I have experienced the issues that people have been talking about a few times during different matches. Now first, let's give you a quick overview of what weapon bloom or spread is in Battlefield 6. It's essentially a built-in random deviation of your bullets when you're firing your weapon. That sounds really bad. Let me put it into context. This stops every single weapon in the game becoming a laser beam at long range, and it helps place weapons into their own categories, having their own specific engagement ranges. Some weapons have more bloom, some have less. Some are built to be used at longer ranges, some of them aren't. And you're going to experience this quite often in-game. Sometimes when you fire your weapon, some of the bullets aren't going to hit the target. Combined with recoil, changing attachments on your weapon, and burst firing, which helps to negate the effect, weapon bloom builds up different profiles for weapons that differentiates them from one another. Now, compared to the beta, this bloom effect has been ramped up for the launch of Battlefield 6 to a level where players almost immediately noticed it. Now, personally, I think they've gone a bit too far with it, and I would prefer if they scaled it back closer to what the gunplay was like in the beta, where I did feel it was probably the best that I'd experienced in a Battlefield game since the later BF4 days. And to coincide with this change in bloom, it also appears to be bugged, which might actually be the cause of most of the complaints about the system. A lot of players, including myself, have been experiencing moments where no matter how many bullets you fire until you're killed in the gunfight, sometimes you just cannot get shots to hit their target. And you can actually see the bullets landing around your target as opposed to on it, which is not ideal. It seems as though there may be a bug where the bloom effect is being applied at a far greater rate than it should be, and some people are theorizing that this comes down to how quickly you choose to fire after coming out of certain movements, like sprinting, jumping, or mantling over cover. I've encountered a few moments where, like, I'll come round a corner in full sprint and I'm met by an enemy that I want to shoot. I then switch to ADS as fast as I can, and my bullets, despite my reticle and crosshair being over the enemy player, they don't hit their target at all and miss completely. Now, weapon bloom by its own definition is built to stop every single shot hitting, but the bug here is that not a single shot hits the target. And this becomes quite frustrating, especially if you're somebody who has good aim, who knows that at short to medium distances, that you're able to land most of the shots that you fire. The bug feels like I'm being given the full bloom effect whilst in full movement, where I've now come out of that movement and I'm standing still or slightly strafing from side to side. The transition to the amount of bloom whilst in those states is taking too long, and as a result, I'm missing shots that I should be landing. If I win or lose the gunfight, that's more nuanced because there is another player there or potentially more players involved in the engagement. I'm specifically talking about your weapon bloom in the engagement here. And it just feels off at the moment, especially compared to the beta, where it felt like the bloom effect was far less prevalent when firing your weapon whilst moving. There were some bugs in the beta with this system as well, and the devs said they'd fix them, but it sounds like they haven't fixed them. Now, like I said, I don't think having bloom is necessarily a bad thing in an FPS game, especially one that's designed to give almost every player the opportunity to have fun in a large sandbox environment. We're not playing a competitive shooter here. But certainly, right now, the bloom effect isn't working properly, and that is giving people a much more negative feeling towards it overall, which is totally understandable. It's not working correctly. What I think needs to happen, at least in the short term, is a weakening of the bloom effect overall, and then an investigation into the issue that appears to be manifesting itself in these gunfights, where players are simply unable to get their bullets to land on a target. And I'd say this is quite a high priority issue for Battlefield 6 because 95% of the time, you're running around with a weapon in your hands, and you expect it to behave in a certain way based on what class it is and what attachments you've put on it. And right now, that's simply not happening on a consistent basis. Next, we're going to talk about progression and rewards. Battlefield 6, like almost any other game on the market, has a progression system. It's built to unlock and reward players for their time spent playing. We've got a career progression rank, where unlocks and items are tied to your overall rank in the game, with each new rank achieved unlocking more weapons, gadgets, soldier outfits, and even more. We've got hardware progression, specific to weapons, vehicles, and gadgets. This system rewards you with attachments for your weapons, the more that you use them, and specifically, it appears the better attachments are placed well into the higher ranks for each gun, and on top of that, each weapon and vehicle possesses a mastery unlock at rank 50, rewarding players with a weapon package for that weapon or a paint job for that vehicle. And then there will also be Battle Pass progression, but since that isn't live in the game until Season 1, we'll just park that part of the discussion for now. The main feedback appears to be focused around the weapon and vehicle progression, which is quite slow compared to previous games and other games currently on the market. You have to invest significant periods of time into the weapons in order to push them up to a point where attachments that truly change how the weapons perform come into play. And with the more powerful weapon-changing attachments not being available until well into the later ranks, players are stating there's less satisfaction to this progression system right now. It's far too much of a grind, and the reward for completing that grind takes too long, leading to them feeling like there's little point bothering to engage with it. Now, personally, I agree with the general feedback that weapon and vehicle progression is too slow, especially when we have the previous experience of other Battlefield games and the experience of the progression during the Battlefield 6 open beta, which to me felt very, very fast. It seems we now have a classic DICE scenario on our hands here. Something was too powerful, too good, too easy to use, absolutely nerf it into the ground so that it becomes ineffective, and eventually, oh, we're going to have to buff it back up to a more reasonable level. This has happened countless times in Battlefield's history with different weapons, different attachments, and vehicles, but I actually think it's a far more serious issue here in Battlefield 6 because the progression system, it's fundamental to experiencing the game in a fun and enjoyable way. If players are unable to feel like their time spent playing is actually worth it, they're far more likely to stop playing and find another activity that values their time in a fairer way. Over the last decade, the last 15 years, we've seen so many games push the limit further and further when it comes to their progression systems, stretching the time needed to unlock items, all in the aid of increasing an individual player's session time. Games no longer just have to compete with one another. They're competing against streaming platforms like Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney+. They're competing against the unavoidable distraction of doom scrolling on platforms like Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. They're competing against YouTube, where hours can go by watching content that is designed to keep you engaged on platform for as long as possible. Ironic that. But my point is, right now, in Battlefield 6, the team has taken it way too far. And to sort of top it all off, the team has built into Battlefield 6 a mastery mechanic that offers this final reward for mastering a weapon or vehicle. It gives you the unstoppable force package for weapons or a paint job for vehicles. Now, I understand that the team has spoken about keeping cosmetics in line with the theme of Battlefield 6, and this package certainly does that. It's quite nuanced. But does this not feel like a super weak source reward for all of that progression work? I think it does. If you're going to have a mastery mechanic in your game, and you can agree or disagree whether you think this game needs one, at least make the rewards worth the grind. I think to solve this overall issue, though, they need to balance the progression system for all different types of players, engaged and more casual ones, So I think the speed at which you unlock weapon progression and vehicle progression items should be sped up by like 30% or so. The open beta progression speed was clearly accelerated, likely as part of a test to make sure that it worked properly, and so having it at that speed seems a bit unreasonable, and I think goes too far in the other direction. We'd have people complaining they'd unlocked everything too fast, and now they've got nothing to work towards. But right now, especially for the less frequent players of Battlefield 6, people who don't have time to put hours and hours into the game at launch, I think their time isn't being respected, and speeding up the progression to a more reasonable level would be fairer to them. Now, let's talk about the launch maps for Battlefield 6. We got 9 in total, which is pretty decent for a Battlefield game. 8 of them are set up for all the classic game modes like Conquest and Breakthrough, and one of them, Saints Quarter, is designated as a small map only and is locked away to those smaller game modes like Domination and Team Deathmatch. Maps like Operation Firestorm, returning from Battlefield 3, one of my favorites, Mirak Valley and Liberation Peak, they bring the more all-out warfare feeling that we're accustomed to seeing from Battlefield games. But the others just don't quite hit the mark for me. They're not far off, but they're not quite there. I'm a fan of New Sobek City, which sort of combines the feeling of the Aftermath DLC from Battlefield 3, this tighter, urban, combined arms setting, with the color palette and vistas of Gulf of Oman from Battlefield 2, 3, and 4 at this point, with its tall towers that players love to camp on. I also like Siege of Cairo, which keeps combat grounded. It's something of a meat grinder, and it's all broken up with these wider main streets that ground vehicles can interplay with infantry and create these cool moments of chaos. Manhattan Bridge is like an urban playground for infantry, tanks, and choppers, and it offers something epic for everybody. There's destruction everywhere, and everything clashes together around that central flag on Conquest, and then certain squads will peel away for a back rage, and that flips the action and resets all the fights once again. However, the maps just feel a little bit small overall. The only ones that really buck that trend are Operation Firestorm, which in itself has been made smaller from the Battlefield 3 days, but it does still have that proper all-out warfare feeling, and Mirak Valley. For a launch set of maps, they're probably the best looking of any Battlefield game, and having them spread across 4 distinct biomes means that you're always visually stimulated by the environments that you're fighting in, but there's just not that much space here. This all appears to come from an overarching design decision by the developers to reduce the time to action in Battlefield 6, shortening the amount of time that it takes for you from spawning in to getting involved in the fighting. Now previously, Battlefield 2042 went so large with its maps and its player counts that it just felt like you were running through soulless, lifeless stages where battles could have been taking place, but the action was always somewhere else. And remember what I said about DICE having that classic ability of going too far one way with something? Well, it kind of feels like that's happened here again, but to a lesser extent than what they've done with the progression system. The feedback from Battlefield 2042's maps was so overwhelmingly negative due to their insane scale that the team for Battlefield 6 has decided to shrink the scale right down and give players the feeling that they're always involved, they're always spawning inside the battle, never more than a few seconds away from a gunfight. And to me, I think they've gone slightly too far in that direction. New Sobek City, for example, that could be slightly more spread out. A couple of tower blocks set around other points and generally widening out the play space. I mean, the name of the map is New Sobek City. It feels like I'm playing in the middle of a construction site. It could be a fair bit bigger, especially because we've got attack shoppers in the sky. And once those are fixed for both sides so they both spawn in, I think the action is going to get insanely chaotic, and it's going to make the map feel even smaller than what it already is. Liberation Peak is on the smaller side as well, with almost no use of that low river ground used on the map. Could not an objective be put down there, and then the play space widened out for tank and infantry gameplay? Iberian Offensive, it feels like this non-linear, flank-infused successor outside version of Operation Metro, with action happening almost the moment you spawn in, with players just all over the place. There's no time to think on that map. And that is part of Battlefield's modern DNA, for sure. I mean, we've got Operation Metro in previous games, Operation Locker, maps like that. But did we need a map like Iberian Offensive and Empire State to feel a very similar way? I'd argue not. And it is somewhat disappointing that Saints Quarter is so small that it's not available on larger maps. That's a map that personally I'm never going to play, unless someone can take that entire map and sort of stick it onto the side of Iberian Offensive in Portal and just make the overall map bigger. Now, to be honest, maybe I'm being a bit harsh on the maps here because they are very well crafted and they do look incredible and they really give you that atmospheric feeling like you are involved in a bigger battle all the time. And they're being joined by 2 new maps called Blackwell Fields and Eastwood in Season 1, which starts on October the 28th. So we don't really have that long to wait until there's more play spaces for us to play in Battlefield 6. But I just can't shake the feeling that these maps just aren't quite big enough. It feels like we've gone from ultra-massive maps in 2042, which was the wrong end of the scale, and instead of ending up somewhere in the middle, we're kind of a little bit too close to small. Maybe Battlefield 6 is pushing the franchise further into new territory, and this is kind of something that I'm going to have to adapt to, and I'm willing to do that because I really enjoy the game anyway, but that's not going to make me stop wanting slightly larger, more all-out warfare maps in this game. Now, there are a fair few other smaller issues with Battlefield 6, which, although a little bit frustrating, aren't as major as the ones we've already discussed. So I've got a bunch in a list here, and I'm just going to fly through them. So if there are any devs listening, they can check them off their list and make sure they're all on there. I have no doubt they know about most of them anyway, but you never know. There might be some that they've missed. Currently on several maps, the helis on the NATO side don't spawn in, and this is also present with some of the tanks as well, making some of the maps terribly imbalanced sometimes. There's an awful bug with the lighting in the game, where it feels like HDR is being forced on, so the outside to inside lighting is quite frankly blinding. And as somebody who uses an OLED monitor, and I know a lot of players will be playing on their OLED TVs, this needs addressing ASAP. Footstep audio often gets lost in the mix. This needs upping in the priority of audio being delivered to the player. The massive fuck-off jet flying over the top of my head is clearly audible, but the sneaky guy going behind me for my tags is completely silent. That needs looking into. The settings menu is still a jumbled mess, and half the stuff you expect to be in one place is actually somewhere else. This needs someone to actually sit down after the launch of Season 1 and work all of this out and implement a better system. The default HUD settings for the game need to be tweaked because the clutter on screen is pretty high. I've implemented some much better scale, opacity, and color settings into my game to try and lessen the impact of icons covering over important elements like unpinged enemy soldiers, for example, so it'd be nice to see if those could be updated in the future. I know the default controller settings aren't brilliant, and my friend the Tactical Brit has a great guide on how to fix those, but by default these should be a bit better, and that needs addressing. The aim assist on controller is worse than what was in place during the open beta, and I think the general feedback from controller players is they'd like those settings back. So perhaps reconsider implementing those instead of what is available right now. There's still countless surfaces in the game that your soldier jumps onto and then bounces up high into the sky off of them. It was fun for the first time during the open beta, but it's happened far too many times now, and it's getting a little bit boring. And it needs to be fixed because I've actually died a couple of times from being bounced in the air, and of course I'm completely out of cover, not intending to be in that position. So if that could be fixed, that would be great. Double XP tokens count time whilst you're outside of matches. That doesn't respect the player, and that should be changed to only being active whilst in a match. Ironically, the reason people are using these tokens so early in the game's life is because progression is too damn slow. Interesting, we've uncovered another issue based on progression. Sometimes the Conquest game score counter gets bugged at 0 for one of the teams, meaning the entire match you have the near end of round music playing, which, whilst it does up the tension, doesn't quite fit the gameplay most of the time. On the spawn screen, sometimes your mouse or controller will just disengage with the icon that you had selected, leaving you unable to actually use your input correctly. On PC, I have to Alt-Tab out of the game and then come back to the game and click on it to fix that problem. I have no idea how you currently fix that for console, but that definitely needs looking into. Air vehicles in general feel like they're made out of paper mache. Attack choppers can be taken down in one big long spray from LMG players on the ground, and that just doesn't feel right. Grenade indicators aren't particularly strong in the heads-up display, sometimes leading you to dying from something that you didn't realize was right next to you, so these icons could be improved. Supply boxes seem to only resupply you once, and then when you leave the area of effect of that supply box, they just stop working and don't resupply you again. I don't know if this is an intentional thing or if this is a bug, but it wasn't something that happened during the open beta as far as I can remember, and it's really frustrating that it keeps happening during matches and you cannot resupply from the giant bag on the ground that has one job: to resupply you. Half of the challenges in the assignments tab aren't tracking properly at the moment, and some of them have like overly ambitious targets for players just to achieve them. Just like the progression system, I think a lot of these need to be looked at and adjusted so that they better respect the player's time. The timer for out of bounds and the bounds area itself on some of the maps for vehicles is way too short and way too tight. On Manhattan Bridge, choppers have really narrow out of bounds areas that they can use, and they can only be in them for 5 seconds, not the usual 10 seconds. And it takes about 5 seconds for the chopper to turn around, so those need to be looked at and adjusted. There's currently no split settings for helicopter and jet look inversion. Some players would like separate options for different air vehicles. Certain attachments say they've been unlocked for you whilst you're playing the game, but then back in the menus, they're still locked despite you having the level requirement for them. If you restart your game, that fixes the problem, but it does disrupt the player flow. Some players would like the ability to put the minimap in the top left corner of the screen rather than the bottom left, and I think a little bit more leniency on HUD customization would be nice, including an overall HUD scale slider. That would be really good. That was something they had in Battlefield 4, I think. It's not here in Battlefield 6. I know you can scale individual icons in certain cases, but in general, the HUD is quite large in Battlefield 6, and having a global scale slider would be really nice. And currently, there's no way to request an order from the squad leader, and there's no squad leader replacement function if the leader isn't handing out orders. Previous games had this, and I think Battlefield 6 would benefit from it. So, that's about it for this video. Remember to leave your feedback down below in the comments section and thumbs up other comments that you agree with, so the most important stuff rises to the top. And make sure that you've dropped a like on the video and subscribe to the channel as well. I'll catch you guys soon.